All right, dude, we are live. What's up, guys? This is Dem Keys, and today we are going to be doing something a little bit different. Today, I'm kind of exploring getting back into Godot. And one of the reasons, one of the things, let me tell you for sure, one of the very, very motivating factors for me is the fact that I am currently going all in on Rust. All in, as in, that's not the only language that I'm currently using. I'm also using Python, but all in as in I'm putting a whole lot of effort into learning Rust, and there's a bunch of different projects that I'm doing and planning to do in Rust. There's a whole lot of stuff that I'm doing that's Rust related. Give me a second here. Okay, so that's why I was like, okay, let me explore Godot again. In the past, I did look into Godot very briefly though. It wasn't for very long. It was um, it was back when Unity had their little, let's say, mishap with the whole licensing, more specifically the runtime fee that they were trying to set up in their license, and then there was like a whole big issue surrounding that because obviously people are gonna complain about the way that they had set that up, because it was an issue, right? Anyways, that became a big issue as it should have, and that got people to explore other game engines, and that was when Godot kind of blew up because Godot had its own fairly active community. Um, I wouldn't necessarily say it was a massive community, but it was still a considerably sized community. It's not like it was a really small community. It was fairly big, even before the Godot. Give me a second, hold on. I feel like there's something I need to do here to kind of help the internet connection. Just a moment. Okay, so yeah, the internet connection is it's having a bit of a hiccup, and we are losing frames for a little bit. So let's just wait for it to stabilize and then I can continue speaking. I think we are good now. Yes, I think so. Okay. So, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say it was a massive community, but I also wouldn't say that it was a tiny community. It was a considerably sized community and fairly active from what I know, because I had heard about Godot before Unity's thing as well. Godot had been, uh, it had been an active community for a good couple of years before that. Anyways, whenever Godot did blow up, I decided to look into it as well, just like, everyone else. And I liked what I was seeing. I explored it for some time. I didn't go too deep into it, but I explored it. I explored it for a certain amount of time. And something that I really liked about Godot was just how lightweight the editor was on my system. Not only that, it's not like a big mess to install. You quite literally just download a zip file, unzip it. It unzips into a self-contained binary, and you just run the binary. That's it. That'll launch their project manager. From the project manager, you select a project, and then that launches the editor, and you're good to go. And the editor itself is also fairly lightweight. And another very, very big plus point for me was the fact that I was able to change the scale of the editor. And I'm doing all this on Linux. Let me also mention that. One of the many things I liked was the fact that I could change the scale of the editor, which I could not do with the Unity editor because for some reason they did not add that functionality in the Linux build of the Unity editor. At least back when I was using Unity, it wasn't there. Now, if they've worked on it, I don't know. I'm not using Unity anymore, so I can't really say anything about that. And I also honestly don't really care at this point. So, I mean, whether it's there or not doesn't really matter because I'm now using Godot, or more importantly, I'm out of the Unity like ecosystem. Where was I going with this? Where was I going with this? I was trying to make a point. What was I saying? Anyways, um I liked what I saw in Godot. At the time, I decided to stick with their own programming language, which is called GD Script, mostly because a lot of very long time devs of Godot, very long time users of Godot, were recommending that use GD Script because it's apparently more tightly integrated with the engine. And I wasn't really very knowledgeable in Godot to really even understand what that truly means for the language to be tightly integrated. My understanding was that you would have less friction in terms of being able to work with various engine components. So the language has been designed in such a way that it is able to work with the engine a lot better than if you were using some external language. Another thing that came to mind was that because it's tightly integrated with Godot, or with the engine itself. So it probably has much better performance. Though the performance thing, it's kind of dependent on a lot of other factors. So like it's not it's not solely just a performance thing, and it's not for sure a performance kind of thing. Um, Sorry, zoned out. Okay. Anyways, yeah, at the time I was I was learning GD script when I learned Godot, when I first started learning Godot, and it was good. It was good. I explored the language for a while, and for for the short period of time that I was learning Godot, I had a good time. I was enjoying exploring the engine, and then eventually I moved back to Unity because I believe at that time I was still exploring stuff in Unity, or trying to the best of my abilities to explore the stuff in Unity, keeping in mind that on my Windows machine, the only Windows machine that I have out of the four machines that I'm running, um, the only Windows machine that I have, it was not able to run Unity very well. There would be all sorts of slowdowns. There would be like random pop-ups of progress bars. Unity editor dot this dot this dot that is doing something, or there's some kind of job happening, or there's like a billion systems running in the background when you have the Unity editor open. So if I so much as click on something, then all of a sudden there's this pop-up coming up, and I was like, okay, this is just. So at the time, I was I was in a situation where my Windows machine, this turned into like a fucking like story time kind of thing. Anyways, at the time, I was in a situation where my Windows machine, the only Windows machine that I have, it wasn't able to run Unity very well. And so working on anything, even working on my VTuber application in Unity on Windows, was becoming a nightmare because it was incredibly slow, and I was spending more time waiting for progress bars to finish, progress bars to vanish, and lag to go away than I was making actual progress. Like that's wild. That's crazy. So I was in a situation where doing Unity stuff on Windows was just a just a lost cause. It was a huge waste of time, and I would have done it on the Linux side if they had put in a UI scaling option. But for some reason, they didn't put that in, and as a result, it kind of became dependent on certain, I think maybe on the current display resolution or on some other factor, which kind of made the UI incredibly tiny. So on my Linux system, when I try to open up Unity, then I have this weird, really small UI that I can't see jack shit in, and I can't even change the display scale. I can't change the UI scale because they haven't added the settings. So just using Unity on both Windows and Linux became a headache for me. But I was trying my best to, keep using it. And eventually I was just like, dude, okay, forget it. I'm just going to go and do Godot stuff. I started doing Godot stuff, and then I kind of came back to Unity to give it another shot. And then I very quickly gave up on that because of just, it was awful, dude. It was bad. It kind of seemed like, and um this kind of, so okay, when so at the time I would kind of complain about it on Twitter, now called X. I would complain about it on there, and one person suggested putting Unity or the project, one of the two, on your SSD. And that made me realize that I think as time has gone by, a lot of things have been introduced into the Unity game engine to support newer hardware in terms of development, not the game that you are building or the application that you are building. The application you are building could very well be aimed at low end hardware, but the engine itself, it seemed like it was aimed at like newer and newer hardware, and so older hardware would just kind of suffer. And in terms of Linux, they kind of just dropped the ball because where the fuck is that UI scaling option, dude? Like, and this wasn't even like a temporary, it wasn't even like a, oh, this is temporarily not available. This was an issue for years, and they did nothing about it. They did nothing about adding that UI scale thing on Linux. So after giving it a try and trying my best to stick with it, I just kind of gave up on it, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna, at some point later on, I'm gonna get into some other engine and do something with that. I might move my VTuber application over to Godot or any other engine, and then I kind of got busy with. I believe that's when I got busy with data science and deep learning. I kind of started exploring both data science and deep learning, and then I just stuck with that for a couple of months. So I got really busy with that, and I didn't really touch game engines or game dev or anything for a while. I mean, for a while I didn't touch it. And somewhere in between, I picked Rust back up. I started, learning more and more Rust and getting more and more comfortable with the language. And yeah, now here we are. Now, in the past, in a couple of previous streams, I have mentioned very heavily how much I wanted to do creative coding and game dev stuff in Rust. And for that, I would have to use some of the frameworks that are available, right? Bevy was out of the question because of it being like a memory hog. Fireox was also out of the question, also a memory hog. Nano was, give me a second. Nano was a good option, and I was definitely Okay, we seem to be live. Did the stream end? Did we run out of the disconnect protection? Okay, no. Oh, shit. Okay. I have no idea what happened there. Uh, but we are back. Yeah, okay. So, anyways, like I was saying, I was looking into nano. I started learning about nano, and then recently, recently being today again, I just a second. Okay, that's a weird first message. Anyways, also I'm working on my game right now for the Pirate Software Game Jam. That's interesting. I think I worked on I think I worked on a game for the Pirate Software Game Jam. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. I don't remember. I think I think so. I'm not sure. I had worked for yeah, I think it was for Pirate Software Game Jam because there was another one that I had done which was for Lord Aethelstan's there was some kind of contest or some kind of event that they were doing where they were inviting people to create their own creative things. Um yeah, yeah, no, I think I did work on I think I did work it was I forgot exactly what it was around. It was something surrounding the concept of um I can't remember. It was kind of like imagine a disease spreading kind of thing. So there was a grid and you were supposed to somehow stop a disease from spreading by taking certain actions. Can't remember what exactly it was. Anyways, okay. Also, welcome to the stream. Hello, hello. Um, Exploding Fire Gaming. Welcome to the stream. I was just talking about how I just today got interested in checking out Godot again, but this time using Rust. Because for the past, I don't know, 1 or 2 months or something, I've been doing some research on a creative coding framework called Nano. And I was really interested in Nano. I liked what I was seeing. I'm thinking about switching to Godot. Is it worth it? I've mainly used Unity. It depends on what you are trying to do. It was in for quite a lot of people. I noticed it was worth it, especially during the time where Unity did their runtime fees kind of thing. So when everyone was very much motivated to check out other engines, a lot of people did check it out, and they kind of liked what they saw. So many people did actually move over to Godot. I remember I recommended Godot to a friend of mine. Um, I'd rated her after my Twitch stream, and at the time she was using Unreal Engine. I then suggested Godot, and she tried it and stuck with it. Oh shit, my OBS is frozen again. Wait, hold on. Are we good? Yeah, I think we're good. Another lag spike? Yeah, yeah. I have no idea what's going on. But yeah, Godot, I would say it's worth it depending on what you are trying to do. Um, a lot of people who have moved to Godot, who have tried out Godot, they liked what they saw, and they would say, yeah, it's worth it. I explored Godot a little bit. I haven't necessarily worked on projects in Godot enough to be able to tell you that, one is better than the other. One is definitely open source. I'll tell you that. Godot is open source. Godot has a very, very active community right now. And if you're looking to be able to accomplish something, if it's not available in the engine, there's a chance that it might be available outside, like somebody has made a plugin or an add-on or some kind of library or something that's gonna help you out. In my case, I've explored Godot and I've explored GD Script, which is Godot's own native programming language. Now I'm planning on exploring Godot with Rust instead, and I'm planning on using it for both creative coding and game dev. Because I was like, okay, Godot, out of the other engines that I have looked at, like I've looked at Bevy and Firefox and Nano, which is not a game engine, but I was planning on using it for a little bit of game dev as well. It seems like Godot still happens to be the lightest. So why not give Godot a try? Because there is support for Rust through um, through something called GD extensions. And yeah, because I'm doing a whole bunch of Rust coding these days, so I was like, okay, why not give Godot another try? Especially since what you're seeing on the screen right now on the right side, that is on Linux. I have the Godot editor open on Linux, and most of my coding, actually all of my coding now is with the terminal-based workflow. So I'm doing it using NeoVim. So I had a conversation with Gemini about this. Let me, I might as well like read the conversation from the beginning. So I was like, okay, um, I said that I used to do a lot of Unity stuff for years. I know the Unity game engine very well, which is true. I've done Unity stuff for years, and I later on moved away from Unity because I wasn't able to use it. Then I mentioned due to various reasons, I kind of moved away from it over the years. But I want to get back into game dev, and I want to start learning creative coding. I do a lot of Rust and Python these days. So I've been looking into the Rust side. For creative coding, I found Nano, which is great. Um, I could do game dev in that as well using additional crates. That's cool. Um, Bevy and Firefox and so on, they were just unusable for me because of the amount of RAM that they consume. However, I did explore Godot a couple years ago. I was pleasantly surprised with how lightweight it was. At the time, I decided to go with GD script because people kept saying it's tightly integrated with the engine. But I know that the Rust scripting support, um, where was I? Rust scripting support has also been been maturing over the years. But I've seen some people say it's good and some people say it's not so great for their various reasons and preferences. Help me understand how much different Rust for Godot would be than GD script for Godot. And then Gemini gave me like a whole rundown of what the major differences there would be. I'm gonna read that out. First, let me read the chat. Yeah, I've heard of it. I was thinking of doing something similar, but with C++, plus plus, as in my future career, I will likely um, require it. I think maybe Godot has um, I think maybe Godot has C++ plus plus support as well. I don't remember. Though I should mention their own scripting language, GD script, it's not like the language is hard to learn. I did look into it. And if you want to spend the time learning that language, then you can do that. In my case, I did explore it a little bit, but then now because I'm doing a whole lot of Rust, kind of like how you were saying that you're going to be using C++ plus plus in the future, so you kind of want to try and use C++ plus plus for this as well. Similarly, I'm currently learning Rust, so I kind of want to try and do Godot stuff with Rust. Another advantage that um, another advantage that I would have with Rust apparently is that I would be able to use crates that have been written for crates as in libraries that have been written for um, various other types of functionality. Like, for example, if I want to do, let's say I want to import a library that creates um, procedurally generated noise. There's a library called Noise RS, which has a whole bunch of procedural generation related functions. Stuff like Perlin noise or creating a checkerboard pattern or I don't know, any sort of wave patterns, or there's a whole bunch of stuff. These are all it's all mathematical algorithms. It's not using any sort of UI or anything. These things, they just take in input and they give you an output. You can use them wherever you want, right? So in my case, let's say I'm creating a game in Godot using Rust. I would then be able to use this external Rust crate in my Rust project and build the functionality, or well, add in the functionality of that external crate without it having to do anything with Godot. Like, that's a huge plus point. So there's a whole bunch of external functionality that I would be able to add in if I wanted to do so. Like, I'm also doing data science and deep learning on the side. So I'm doing deep learning on both the Python side and the Rust side. I haven't explored the Rust side nearly as much, but I am exploring it as time goes by. So let's say I wanted to run inference on some kind of deep learning model, or maybe I wanted to import an Onyx runtime to run an Onyx model. Well, not import an Onyx runtime, import a crate to be able to set up an Onyx runtime within my Godot application. I would be able to do a bunch of those things because they don't necessarily require UI. They're not going to be interfering with what the game engine is doing in terms of rendering. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that I can do in the background thanks to Rust. You're probably in a similar situation with C++, but I don't know how different it would be in terms of being able to add functionality from external libraries and stuff. Um, but yeah, that's one of the things that kind of got me interested in checking out Godot again. The response from Gemini about the difference between GDScript and Godot for us was this. It's great to hear you're diving back into game development through the lens of creative coding. Since you already know Rust and the Unity way of thinking, you're in a unique spot. Transitioning from GDScript to Rust in Godot isn't just a syntax change, it's a fundamental shift in how you interact with the engine. Since Godot 4, this is handled via GD extension, replacing the older GD native. And the primary library you'll use is Godot Rust, specifically the GD extension crate. Here's a breakdown of how Rust differs from GDScript in the context of Godot. Architectural philosophy, inheritance versus composition. Godot is built on a deep C++ inheritance hierarchy. GDScript mirrors this GDScript mirrors this perfectly. You extend node 2D and you are a node 2D. In Rust, inheritance is faked via composition because Rust doesn't support class-based inheritance. In GDScript, you access properties directly, example self.position, but in Rust, you use a base generic type, a base generic field, you often call self.base.getPosition or use a wrapper. The experience, it feels slightly more disconnected. You aren't writing a script on a node, you are writing a Rust struct that manages a Godot node. So I kind of like the way that Gemini is explaining this to me because it gives me a certain way to think about things. It gives me a certain way to visualize these things. Um, Hold on, where was I? Yeah. Then the slow path versus the fast path. One of the most common misconceptions is that Rust will automatically make your Godot game faster. The bridge, FFI, every time you call a Godot function from Rust, like set position, you cross an FFI foreign function interface boundary. This has a small overhead. If your code is just glue calling engine functions, then GD script can actually be faster because it lives inside the engine's memory space. The Rust wins when you do a heavy computation inside Rust without calling the engine, example, complex procedural generation, custom physics, or AI pathfinding. Then, safety and the borrow checker. This is where most people say it's not so great. Godot's memory model is fundamentally unsafe. Godot's memory model is fundamentally unsafe from a Rust perspective. It uses reference counting and manual memory management in C++. Runtime panics. If you try to mutably borrow a Godot node that is already being used by the engine, then a GD extension will trigger a ref cell style runtime panic to prevent a crash. Then iterative speed. In GD script, you can change a line and hit play. In Rust, you have to recompile a dynamic library, and while GD extension supports hot reloading, it is significantly more finicky than GD script's instant updates. Okay, so at this point, I hadn't mentioned to Gemini that I was going to be using Tmux and NeoVim and stuff like that to um, do the Rust development on a different machine. Well, no, do the Rust development on the same machine, but from a different machine. So I am going to be running Godot and NeoVim on the same machine. However, I'm going to be controlling NeoVim from another machine by being SSH'd into the machine and attaching to the tmux session. So I can use the other machine as a terminal to control NeoVim. And this way, I'll be able to see NeoVim and Godot on two separate screens while NeoVim and Godot are running on the same machine. So I did explain this later on. I also mentioned that I think I did. Yeah, I mentioned this thing because towards the end of this response, Gemini was suggesting Rust, using Rust mainly for any sort of heavy math, any sort of algorithmic stuff that I would have to do, and then using GD script for just the game. Anything that requires handling UI or input triggers or connection signals or whatever, right? And then I said, okay, I kind of want to stick to just one of the languages because it'll allow me to explore and be more efficient with that language. I'm already doing Rust a lot for other stuff, so I'm fairly comfortable with the language. Can I just do the whole game in Rust, or would that somehow be a nightmare to deal with? Then Gemini said this: you can absolutely do the whole game in Rust if you are already comfortable with the borrow checker and the Rust ecosystem. You won't find it hard in the sense of logic, but you will find it friction heavy compared to the Unity workflow you remember. Doing 100% Rust project in Godot is a viable path, but it changes your relationship with the Godot editor. Here is what the quote unquote nightmare would actually look like. though what Gemini was trying to say is that this is not necessarily going to be a nightmare. It's just my, I was saying nightmare. That was kind of an exaggeration. Uh, Give me a second here. There's something that I want to move, which is this thing. Yeah. So let's just move this here, move it a bit here, and I think that's good. Yeah, much better. Now let me just see how much that has changed things. I feel like there's still some real estate that, oh, that's crazy. Oh God, is this what it looks like on stream right now? That's insane. This stream looks like shit, dude. Hold on. Hold on, dude. Is it because I have is it because I have this open? Let me close this. Um yeah, let's unload this. And now give me a second here. I'm kind of laughing because I had a similar conversation with ChatGPT, um, with Godot and C++. I mean, that's a good thing. That's great because, like, okay, hold on. The frame rate has improved. So what I'm gonna do is try and open up the Godot thing again, and let me see. Maybe it might just have been the player on my end that looked like shit. It was kind of like malfunctioning, and I just needed to pause and yeah, give me a second. Let me reload this thing. Hold on just a minute. Okay, you know what? Yeah, it doesn't look that bad. No, okay, so yeah, it's a good thing that you're asking these questions to ChatGPT or whatever LLM you're currently. It's probably okay. It's probably this website. The website probably has a bunch of stuff. Um, yeah, yeah. Let me just close this, and let's also unload this, and we are good to go. Yeah, it's a good thing that you're asking these questions because like I spend a bunch of time talking to Gemini. In my case, I use Gemini. I don't use ChatGPT, but like more or less the same thing, right? We're having conversations with LLMs, regardless which one it is. Um, it's a good thing that you're having these conversations because if I hadn't had this conversation with Gemini, then I wouldn't be thinking of coming back to Godot. I would have probably stuck with Nano, which I like after having this conversation with Gemini, I realized that a lot of the stuff that I was planning on doing with Nano, because I kind of like the creative freedom that you get with creative coding. Um, because I wasn't intending to necessarily do game dev stuff. I just wanted something that gives me the freedom to to say, hey, let's draw so and so shape at so and so location. Just something simple like that. And then of course you can do much more complex stuff as well, right? And I wanted to do this in Rust. I'm aware that there are plenty of other like languages and frameworks within those languages where you are able to do exactly what I'm describing, but I wanted to do it in Rust. And once I saw Nano's API and I saw all the stuff that people can build with Nano, I was like, you know what? I kind of like this. I'm gonna give this a try. And by that time, Godot had kind of like just left my mind. I'd forgotten that I had, even used Godot. It just didn't come up in my mind. It wasn't one of the things that I was thinking of in terms of, what would be a good option for me to try out. And then today, out of nowhere, I was just like, hold on, let me try asking this question to Gemini that, hey, what would be the difference if I did, let's say, hypothetically, I did explore Godot, but this time with Rust, then how good or bad would my experience be? And it turns out that it would be an experience, not necessarily a good or a bad experience, just an experience. And I'm okay with that. I'm definitely okay with that. As long as it's not, look, I'm used to the super, super verbose way of doing things in Rust. That's just how the Rust language is. And there's good reason for that as well. It's not for no reason. There's often, you often want predictability. You often want reproducibility. What is the deterministic behavior? That's the word. You often want deterministic behavior. You often want safety guarantees, memory safety, and all sorts of, you know, safety features and all sorts of performance efficiency related stuff. You often want these kinds of things in performance critical applications, and Rust is designed to give you just that. Rust and the ecosystem that's built around it is designed to give you just that. So having a very verbose language is a pretty small cost to pay for getting all of that extra stuff. So, like, I'm not complaining about it being a verbose language, but we can acknowledge that yes, it is a very verbose language, right? Um, where was I going with this? Why was I saying this? I forgot why exactly I was. I think I was. I think the point I was getting at was that. Um, oh yeah. Aside from Rust being a very verbose language compared to, let's say, GD script, would there be any actual problems, like any actual drawbacks, any actual, let's say, performance hits? Because the language being a lot more verbose, it's not really, it doesn't really count as a minus point for me, at least not anymore. With the amount of Rust coding that I've been doing, I'm kind of just used to it. And every now and then, when I go back to Python and I do a bunch of things in Python, then I just enjoy the nice, concise syntax for a while before I come back to Rust. So I'm kind of used to the Rust way of doing things. So I need to find out that, aside from, these what are a lot more advanced problems, would I deal with any sort of, like, would trying to use Rust for usual stuff that just interacts with the engine make things incredibly slow to the point that it would be noticeable, or would it just be not as fast as GDScript? Because if it's not as fast as GDScript, that's fine. GDScript might be like super, super fast, and doing the same thing in Rust, it might just be fast. Not super fast, not very fast, it might just be fast. But they're both still fast. You know what I'm saying? So if that's the situation, then I'm perfectly fine with that. If using Rust is not actively introducing performance bottlenecks in some way, I'm okay with using Rust, and I definitely want to then use Rust. And then I guess a bunch of the projects that I had in mind, I'm going to be doing them in Rust. A bunch of be it game ideas, a bunch of creative coding ideas, even the redesign of my VTuber application, or I guess I should call it a, well, at this point I should just call it my stream application, which it does include the VTuber model as well. Maybe I could redesign the VTuber model. I actually had a sort of design in mind for whenever I for whenever I manage to um, sorry, lost my train of thought. Um, I had Oh, yeah, for whenever I manage to set up very, very simple like body tracking and facial tracking and stuff like that, be it hardware based or using the webcam, whenever I manage to set up, well, the facial tracking is going to be webcam definitely, but I'm talking about like the hand movements. So I was kind of trying to decide whether I wanted to create trackers, like physical trackers, or if I would use something like the YOLO model. YOLO has a body pose detection model that we can use, and there's also a nice convenient way to export it to Onyx, so I can then run that model in Onyx instead of having to run the model, you know, as its own self. Because the entire thing is in Python, and I want to run it on the Rust side, not on the Python side. I want to bring as much of the work to the Rust side as possible. And one of these, to do that with one of these models, you would have to export it to a format that could, actually, okay, another thing that could be done, and this is if all of the operators in the Onyx version of the model are supported. So another thing that I could do is export the model to Onyx, or get their, they might have provided an exported version of the model. I don't know. I'll have to see the instructions. What I could do is I could get their version of, I could get the Onyx version of their model, and then use the Onyx to burn converter um, to produce the burn Rust version of that entire neural network, that entire model, in fact, and then I can run it as native Rust code. So then I won't be relying on the Onyx runtime. I'm sure there'll be benefits of doing that. I'll have to see, like, compared to the Onyx runtime, what real benefits would I be looking at in terms of optimizations? Because I'm pretty sure the Rust, no, the burn crate does add some sort of optimizations that you can use. But yeah, okay. Anyways, carrying on with what Gemini told me. So the realities of 100% Rust in Godot. The Godot is the Godot is the IDE. Oh, okay. So the problem here, one of the problems is that Godot is the IDE. I'm assuming what Gemini is talking about here is um, the fact that you do the scripting within Godot itself, and a lot of, well, when you're talking about the editor, yeah. So that one, at least if you're doing GD script, then that one editor is your everything. You create your scene there, you edit properties there, you even do your coding over there. At least, again, if you're doing GD script, then you do your coding there because they have a script pane, a script tab or something, which gives you a nice code editor that you can do your coding in. I'm not going to be using any of that though. Only going to be uh, um, I'm only going to be using NeoVim, and I'm mainly using Rust. So for me, one of the challenges that Gemini has mentioned is that whenever the because after I type out and save my Rust code, I'll have to rebuild the entire project so it can produce a DLL or an SO file or whatever specific library format is required by Godot. It builds the entire code into something like that, or a group of that, and then oh yeah, sorry, and then that gets reloaded by Godot. So in order to trigger the reload, I would just need to, like, click a mouse button or something in within the editor, and it'll then reload. Right. Okay. Continuing reading this. In Unity, you spend a lot of time in the inspector. In Godot with Rust, the editor becomes mostly a scene compositor. You will define your signals, exported variables, and node structures in Rust. You then you then have to build the project, go back to Godot, and wait for it to refresh the library to see those changes. If you rename a variable, this last point I didn't understand, where it said if you rename a variable in Rust, you might break the connection in the tscn file. I'm assuming that's the scene file, requiring manual fixing in the editor. So I'm gonna have to produce this problem and then fix it to see, yeah, I'm gonna have to produce this problem and then fix it to understand exactly what this is talking about. Then boilerplate and the wrap. Because Godot is C++, every Rust struct you want the engine to see must be annotated. You can't just write words. You can't just write a normal Rust struct. It has to look like this. In this case, they're showing a simple Rust struct. Hold on, I think, well, if I do copy paste it, it's gonna throw an error, so there's no point in. I mean, I could still like show it. I could open up NeoVim somewhere here. I guess we can open it up here. Just have an empty kind of thing. Okay, open this up and let's copy this entire code. Just give me a second because I'm not sure what this is gonna end up pasting. Okay. Right. So this is this is the code that Gemini has given as an example. So this is our struct, and then above the struct we have to add these annotations. And here we are implementing what I'm assuming are traits, which I guess implementing traits is a way to attach, quote unquote, a component to a specific node. I don't know. I'm gonna have to find a way to like visualize this, because if I'm looking at it from the if I'm looking at it from the Unity point of view, that is more of like a game object kind of architecture. So you have a game object, you attach components to it. Any script that you attach is also a component, and the script is then able to access other components within this game object through the API. Um, Here, I think things are slightly different. The way even of accessing components, accessing like other nodes, I don't know if they call them components, or I think those are also called nodes. Like the components are also called nodes. I don't remember. I'm gonna have to like re-explore Godot again. Which I think, yeah, after reading all of this conversation that I've been having, because there was a lot more in here in terms of Godot explaining, no, Gemini explaining, Godot with Rust to me. There was quite a lot. Um, okay, one of the other differences in GDScript, you might do sprite2d.play. In Rust, you have to safely fetch the node. You have to safely fetch that node, cast it to the correct type, and handle the possibility that it doesn't exist. Or use self.base.get node as. Oh, that's where we do the turbofish thing with the generic and stuff like that. Okay. I'm glad that I came across the concept of turbofish yesterday. I still have to explore that a bit more, because once we start doing stuff with a lot more stuff with generics, then I feel like I'm going to be using that quite a lot. And well, it's popped up here, so this is also another sign that yes, I should be exploring it. Okay, it is significantly more verbose. Okay, all right. Then why it might not be a nightmare for you, given your background in creative coding and Rust, here is why you might actually prefer 100% Rust. Um, crates.io. So this is where it's explaining about like, adding in external crates, external Rust crates. Crates.io. This is a killer feature. You want CRD for saving, ND array for math, GLAM for vectors, a random procedural generation crate, all of that. You can just add it to the cargo.toml and GDScript. Oh, yeah, you can just add it to the cargo.toml, whereas GDScript is a silo, um, Rust is an open ocean. So basically, this is what I was talking about earlier, that you can add a bunch of different crates to bring in extra pure Rust functionality. And as long as it's not something that requires, um, some kind of windowing functionality, as long as it's something that's purely within Rust itself. So, like if it's something like a procedural generation crate, or if it's something that does path-based rendering, so you can like define a path and then there's an entire mesh generated along that path, or if there's something that does, let's say, animation easing functions for you, or tweening functions, or stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff that you can um, that you can do in Rust that doesn't necessarily require some sort of windowing thing. It's just creating and giving you that functionality, and you can then use that functionality for various different situations. And my situation is one such situation. So, considering that I've now explored a good portion of um, the Rust ecosystem, well, I would say there's still a lot for me to explore, but like considering how much I have explored of the Rust ecosystem, there's quite a bit that you can that 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 there's quite a bit of functionality that people have already worked on for you, which is amazing. Like that's just wow, that is amazing. Something like Noise RS is a good. It's a great example. Um, like it's basically a bunch of math functions that you can pass in input to and get output from. You don't have to tie it to anything specific, or rather, it is not tied to anything specific. You then tie it to something specific based on your use case. Okay, the next thing is refactoring. In a large Unity project, renaming things could be a mess. Rust's compiler and Rust analyzer make refactoring a complex game state incredibly safe. Then performance stability. You won't deal with GDScript's garbage collection spikes. Your frame times will be much more predictable, which is vital for smooth creative coding visuals. The verdict: it is not a nightmare if you treat Godot as a renderer and scene tree manager rather than a coding environment. If you try to use the Godot script editor and treat it like GDScript, you will wait. If you try to use the Godot script editor and treat it like GDScript, you will hate it. If you stay in VS Code, use Cargo Watch, and treat Godot as a viewer for your Rust logic, it's a very powerful setup. Then potential bottleneck. Okay, yeah, don't worry about the bottleneck. It mentioned this thing about like compiling and how much RAM Rust C is going to take up during the compilation process. I do need to look into that. I need to see how big that's going to end up being, because it is very much possible that maybe that code base is so big that I might end up in a similar situation to, I don't know, Nano and Bevy, where it's like GB's worth of memory being taken up by the Rust analyzer when I'm coding. And then when I do the build, then you have the Rust compiler and whatever linker is being used, they are taking up their own amount of memory, and then it just fills up the memory. I guess I can compile a simple, hello world Godot program and see what that looks like. or what that experience is like. Okay. Then I mentioned later on in the conversation that I'm loving these pros and cons. I would like to talk about this more. Also, I want to give a little info about my dev setup. I mentioned the whole thing about running Rust and running NeoVim and Godot on the same machine, but then controlling NeoVim from another machine. So even though NeoVim is running on the same machine as Godot, it is being controlled from another machine, and I'm doing this through SSH and Tmux. Okay. Um, so then Gemini replied saying, "This setup is a power user dream and fits the Godot Rust workflow perfectly. Since you are using a dual machine SSH tmux flow, you are essentially treating Godot like a live updating compiler while your logic stays in the terminal. However, there is a specific technical gotcha with GD extension and remote development that you need to be aware of. The hot reload dance. In Godot 4, GD extension supports in-editor hot reloading. The flow you run cargo build on MO1 via your tmux session from MO2. I'm glad that Gemini understood exactly what my workflow was here. Anyways, the result, the .so file on Linux or the DLL file on Windows um, on MO1 updates. Okay, so the file gets updated on in this case both of them are Linux. So the .so file will be updated. Then the trigger, Godot on MO1 acts. Godot on MO1 detects the file change if you have reloadable equals true in your GD extension file. No, Godot on MO1 detects the file change. If you have reloadable equals true in your GD extension file, Godot will swap the library in memory without you having to restart the editor. Okay. The SSH caveat, Godot's hot reload is triggered by the editor gaining focus. Oh, so when you do Alt Tab, since you are coding on MO2, which is machine O2, the Godot window on MO1 might stay inactive. You may need to occasionally, this is what I was talking about earlier. So you may need to occasionally click the Godot window on MO1 to trigger the refresh or use a tool like xdot on MO1 to briefly flicker focus back to Godot after a successful build. Okay, then there was some extra tips and stuff for stuff that I could do. Stuff like using Cargo Watch and doing an initial build before I open up the project, doing an initial cargo build before opening up the project in NeoVim, so that a bunch of code that needs to be generated, because apparently there's a bunch of code that is being generated, a bunch of the code that needs to be generated will be generated. And then once I open up the project, then NeoVim is going to be able to read, well, the Rust analyzer is going to be able to read all of that generated code and give me the required, IntelliSense and autocomplete and stuff like that. Okay. Is it a nightmare, quote unquote, for your specific setup? Actually, for you, it's probably less of a nightmare than it is for most people. That is true. That is very true, because my specific setup works for me because of the way that I've set things up. And this is actually not a nightmare for me, again, because of the way that I've set things up. Though I can see how a bunch of other people who are not used to this kind of a setup, they might find it to be a nightmare. In my head, the dots just connect very well when it comes to this setup, so I'm able to use this. Okay, then a nano-like loop in Godot Rust. Okay. To get started, your Rust code will look something like this. Notice how it feels like a structured version of a creative coding loop. Yeah, okay. Then I asked another question. I said, okay, wait, so I could technically also use Godot with Rust for creative coding? I was just trying to, get Gemini to spell everything out for me. At this point, I kind of understood that, yeah, I can use it for these multiple purposes, but then I wanted Gemini to give me more information. So I was just like, oh, wait, so you can actually do this thing? So that's why I was like, saying it in that way. Okay. Wait, so I could technically also use Godot with Rust for creative coding? How different would that be from just using Nano? Also, because I'm using Rust, I can add a bunch of extra functionality using other Rust crates without any problems. That's kind of powerful. Give me a second here. Just a second. Okay. All right. So, what was I saying? Yeah, also because I'm using Rust, I can add a bunch of extra functionality using other Rust crates without any problems. That's kind of powerful. And then Gemini replied, yes, it is extremely powerful. You've essentially discovered the secret sauce, quote unquote, of using a game engine as a framework. You get the industrial strength rendering, windowing, and input handling of Godot, combined with the logic and ecosystem of Rust. Where was I? Yeah. Godot plus Rust versus Nano. While both allow you to write Rust to draw things, the mental model is different. And then Gemini gave me like a table sort of thing where it mentioned that the amount of control you have. Well, it was a table about various features, and then it compared that, okay, in Nano what this feature would be like, and in Godot Rust what the feature would be like. So it said, okay, control, in Nano you own the main loop function and the loop. In Godot plus Rust, Godot owns the loop. you hook into you hook into it via nodes. Then UI. For Nano, you have a very basic UI using either Conrad, I think, or EGUI, which I believe now they are using EGUI. I think they've moved on from that other one. Whereas in Godot, you have a high-end UI system with buttons, sliders, graphs out of the box. Then asset management, it has to be manually done in Nano, and in Godot, it's visual, drag and drop import, compression and remapping and so on. Then shaders. In Nano, it's raw WGSL, Vulkan, high boilerplate, whereas in Godot and Rust, well, in this case, it's just Godot, it'll be using Godot shading language, which is a GLSL-like shading language with instant preview. Then drawing. Drawing is frame-based, where you draw every frame, whereas in Godot, it is scene-based plus draw calls in retain mode. I'll have to look into what retain mode is. Then the difference in workflow. In Nano, if you want a slider to change the speed of an animation, you have to code the slider logic or integrate a library. In Godot, you drag an H slider node into your scene, connect it, connect its signal to your Rust struct, and you're done. You spend more time on the creative part and less on the plumbing. Okay, the power of the Rust ecosystem. This is where it gets exciting because GD extension links your Rust code as a library. Any crate that doesn't require its own windowing system will work perfectly. So for data/math, you can use NDArray for complex linear algebra or NoiseRS for procedural terrain generation. For networking, if you want your creative coding piece to react to live Twitch chat, then add Tokyo and a Twitch API crate. For serialization, you can use CRD to save your art parameters to JSON or YAML effortlessly. For audio, you can use, then it spoke about like a bunch of high level and low level audio crates. For AI, you can drop in Candle or TCH, which is PyTorch bindings for Rust, or Rust bindings for PyTorch, I should say, to run local. Actually, no, they are Rust bindings. Yeah, okay, maybe it's Rust bindings for PyTorch. I was about to say Rust bindings for Torch, but I think it's for PyTorch specifically. I'll have to look into how that works exactly because PyTorch is Python bindings for Torch, but then there's a whole like it's a lot more than just bindings. PyTorch is a lot much more than just bindings. So like I have to look into, yeah, I can probably have a different conversation with Gemini about that. Okay. Hold on, where was I? Yeah. Creative coding via, okay, so yeah, then Gemini also mentioned this thing about something called the rendering server, which I believe I have looked into this previously when I'd looked into Godot, like a long time back. I didn't go too deep into it, but like apparently through the rendering server, it says, okay, in Godot, you don't just have to use nodes. For true creative coding, like drawing 100,000 particles, you can use the rendering server. This is a low-level API that talks almost directly to the GPU. In Rust, it looks like so and so. So then it gave some example code of what that would look like. This is significantly faster than using high-level objects and allows you to push the limits of MO1's hardware. Is it a nightmare to manage? The only real nightmare, quote unquote, is type conversion. Godot has its own types like string name, variant, vector2, array, etc. And Rust has string, vec, and f32. Well, I think more of them are supported as well. Maybe not just that, or maybe it's just that. Yeah, that's also a possibility. Maybe it's just that. Anyways, okay. You will spend a bit more time doing so and so, so and so, so and so. Okay, but um, since you are comfortable with Rust, this is just a minor tax for the massive gain in safety and library access. Okay, was there more? I did ask more. Yeah, so I was like, okay, wait, so I can use Godot plus Rust for both game. Wait, hold on. Okay, okay, yeah. So then I took it a step further. I asked some more questions. I was like, okay, wait, so I can use Godot plus Rust for both game dev and creative coding, and I don't really need to touch Nano. Would I be missing out on anything there? And I'm glad that you mentioned about the rendering server thing, because I know that Godot has that whole scene and node thing going on, and that introduces a different way of thinking. But if I wanted true creative freedom in terms of being able to say, draw X shape on Y group of pixels at Z position, I could do that in Godot as well. I'm not limited to Godot's architecture. Also, what kind of game dev architecture would I be following if I used Godot to make a game? I know ECS is a thing in game dev. Is it a thing in Godot as well? I don't think it's necessarily a thing in Godot, but like Godot has its own way of doing things. I don't know if it's necessarily an ECS approach, so I can't say anything about that. But Godot does have its own sort of architecture. I don't know if I read this entire answer. Yeah, I don't think yeah, no, I was in the middle of reading this answer when I got busy doing something else, and then it was kind of time to stream. And yeah, yeah. Speaking of the stream, now I started the stream late, and that is completely on me. Um, However, I kind of do need to wait. Give me a second. Hold on. Um, I'm just looking. Oh, this is interesting. I think someone is doing wait, are we no, this is follower only chat. Never mind. We cannot jump in there. Give me a second. Okay, I think I think we'll go over to this person's stream. This is someone named Lei Wei. They just started their stream, so we're gonna head over to their thing and hang out. So yeah, that's gonna be it for today's stream. I really wish I would have started the stream earlier, but I mean, this is not that bad. We streamed for like an hour and 20 minutes, so that's still good. I'm probably going to spend some more time looking into, Godot with Rust and try my best to get a very bare bones, very basic Hello World Godot thing going. And then we can see where to go from there because once I get that going, I think at that point I'm ready to just like push Nano to the side. If things go well, then I'll probably just push Nano to the side and mainly only use Godot because there's going to be a whole bunch of like, extra functionality that comes along with Godot. Which reminds me, I need to also ask Gemini that, okay, what about like the background systems and stuff? How much heavier would they be? How much more of a load would they introduce? And is there any way to strip away the stuff that I don't need? And does that get done automatically as well? Like, I mean, maybe there's something in place to do that. I don't know. But yeah, okay. So, um, that's going to be it for today's stream. Exploding Fire Gaming, thanks for hanging out and chatting. Anyone else who might have been lurking in the chat, thanks for hanging out. I hope you guys have a nice day, and I'll see you all next time.